welcome to The Pivot, stories of people who made a change. My name is Andrew Osenga. My guest today is N.T. Wright. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I got to talk to N.T. Wright. Tom, as he's known. N.T. Wright is one of the world's leading New Testament scholars. He's written 87 books, as he told me on this interview. His latest book is called God's Homecoming. Andrew Peterson and I just played a concert the other night, a Rich Mullins tribute thing, and I walked into the room where we were going to have dinner, and he was like, "Hey, what are you reading?" I said, "I'm reading this book called The Samurai by Shisako Endo. It's what we're reading for my book club." And he said that he had just finished N.T. Wright's new book, God's Homecoming. He's like, "Man, it was incredible." He told me all about the book and how just wonderful it was. And I said, I had just interviewed N.T. Wright on my podcast. And he said, "What was he like? Was he awesome?" And I said, "Yes," which is what you're about to listen to. So I'll stop talking. Here's my conversation with N.T. Wright. Can I call you Tom?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Almost everyone calls me Tom.
Okay. Well, it is really an honor to get to talk with you. I'm really grateful. Where are you today?
I'm in Oxford. My wife and I live more or less half of the year here in Oxford. We have a home in northern Scotland as well. And but during the university term, we're here in Oxford. And then once the students go, then the idea is we go too, except we disappear off up north. But at the moment, it's the middle of the middle of the spring term or whatever they call it, and so we're here in Oxford.
Wow. Are you teaching currently?
I teach part-time. I do one course of Bible expositions for Wycliffe Hall in Oxford, which this academic year, the ones that I did were last term, so I did a whole sequence on the Book of Malachi. And this term and next term, I just do odd one-off preachings, lectures, etc., rather than a whole course. And then I also teach for their summer course. It's kind of a nice existence at the moment. Don't know how long I'll go on doing this. I'm much older than several people I know who are retired already. So, but I consider this semi-retirement anyway.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, that's an amazing room you have right there.
It's a nice room. When we came into this house, which was 6 years ago, two of the walls had full bookcases on, and we fitted the last one in ourselves to get all the stuff in. And then I had a similar room up in Wycliffe Hall as well with about the same number of books. They have now been moved. I don't know if you know the Lanier Library in Houston, Texas.
Yeah.
Mark Lanier, who's become a good friend, he has now taken over an old manor house just outside Oxford, Yarnton Manor, and has converted a huge barn there into a theological library. And I have promised him that he can buy from me my books in bits. So he's got the first tranche at the moment, and there's more coming. Except that my youngest son is now a theologian as well, and so I've told him he can have first pick, and Mark will get the rest.
Well, Tom, I've read a lot of your books. I feel like I have some kind of an understanding of what you think about a lot of things, but I'm really curious, how did you get into this lifetime of work? Like, what is the story that leads to your life of being a priest and an author? Like, would you paint a picture for me of your childhood?
Yeah. We were a very ordinary middle-class family in the far northeast of England, quite up near the Scottish border, a little town called Morpeth, just north of Newcastle on Tyne. My mother's father was a parish priest who ended up as an archdeacon in the very far north of Northumberland, and lots of clergy on that side of the family, and a church-going tradition from both sides of the family. My father's family were either farmers or local businessmen, and again, so on my father's side, I'm descended from a long line of church wardens, and on my mother's side from quite a lot of clergy. So no surprises in a way. that obviously I'm ordained, my next brother down is ordained, my sister is married to a retired priest. And we have
So it's the
nephews and
family
nieces, and now
business.
one of my own sons. So it's just one of those things that happens sometimes in families. Like some families, everyone becomes doctors, and others families, everyone becomes lawyers. And I'm happy to say, if that's how God works to call people, because there will be other challenges, but I never had to face the challenge of, you mean you want to be a priest? What sort of a life is that? It was kind of natural in our family. But there were other things like being a
Hmm.
theologian that my parents knew nothing about, bless them. So middle class, middle of the road Anglicans, and from an early age, what I was hearing in church, what I was singing in church, I sang in the boys' line in a parish church choir. What I was singing, what I was hearing, the prayers, something clicked from an early age, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, that sort of age. I'm not sure when, but I have some vivid memories of being suddenly aware of the love of God enveloping me because of Jesus dying, etc. And so that I didn't keep a diary. I don't know when exactly that was, but it goes quite a long way back for me. And then it was a matter of putting bits and pieces together. I was very fortunate in that in my teens, I regularly attended the Scripture Union boys' camps in Scotland, and there were boys from schools all over the place. When we used to go and stay in tents up in the Scottish Highlands. And for me,
Wow.
the real thing was climbing, sailing, canoeing, rock climbing, etc., and a lot of good outdoor fun. But morning and evening, there were camp prayers with short talks, like sort of 7-minute talks from the leaders, going through basic stuff. And we all had to have a Bible, have it open and find this verse, and let's read that together. And now what's going on here? And I found that exciting, enthralling, and it saw me through my teens because I didn't get much help at school. Um, there was school chapel every day I was at a boarding school, but
Oh,
most
wow.
boys took no notice of it at all. I tried to take notice of it because it was meaning more and more to me, but it wasn't very supportive. Whereas I was getting a boost to my faith in the Easter and summer holidays in these camps up in Scotland. And then church life at home was fairly ho-hum, say middle of the road Anglican, but I grew up knowing all the hymns, knowing half the Psalms by heart. I still find we now have a grandson who sings in the choir at New College, which is right across the street from where I'm sitting. And when I go to evensong there and watch him singing the Psalms, it does my heart good because I think he's getting it too.
Yeah.
And so that's really how I was formed then, and I knew from, I don't know, about the age of 10, 11, something like that, that I was called to ministry, and that was not a shall I shan't I thing. It was just knowing that that was what was going to happen. It was
Hmm.
just a given, and as I say, it was quite a natural thing in our family, but it seemed clear to me that's what I had to do. At that stage, I had no idea what actually studying the Bible, let alone studying theology, would be like. I assumed that one went and learnt more about the Bible, and I discovered that the New Testament was originally written in Greek, and I was doing Latin and then picked up Greek, did Latin from the age of 8, and Greek from the age of 13. And
Oh my
so
gosh.
these were natural things for me. And I enjoyed studying the classical world. The classics was my first degree here in Oxford, before I did theology as a second degree. So the whole business of the classical world and then understanding Christianity in its classical context, this was meat and drink to me. This is what I wanted to get my teeth into and always
Hmm.
enjoyed. Um, and then when I was a student, I was very involved here in Oxford in the Christian Union, which is an evangelical, interdenominational Christian union. Evangelical in the British sense, I should say, not the American sense. The two words are
How do you define those differences?
how long have we got? Um, totally different. We have evangelicals in Britain politically tend to be centre or centre left,
Hmm.
and the phenomenon of the current movement in America has no parallel in Britain.
Hmm.
Little pockets maybe here and there, but it's a completely different thing. We never had a civil war in the 19th century. We never had a Scopes trial. We never had the big debates about Darwin and so on. We never had all
Hmm.
the things that have formed American fundamentalism and evangelicalism. We've never had a dispensationalist movement. We've never had lots of people charging around believing in the rapture. There are pockets, there are groups, there are some small denominations that do that stuff, mostly influenced by America. So all the things which have formed contemporary American evangelicalism are simply not known. In fact, most British Christians have no idea of what American Christianity is like. Because I go to America all the time, I'm aware, and I've been reading recently quite a bit of stuff. I don't know if you know Molly Worthen's new book, Spellbound, um,
Yeah.
and James Davison Hunter's book, Democracy and Solidarity. And then there's an extraordinary eye-opening book by a Calvin College professor called Jesus and John Wayne. I can't remember
Oh,
the professor's name. You
amazing.
know that book?
Kristen Dumenes.
Well
Yeah.
done, well done. Yes, that's right. I just read that, and my goodness, I had no
Oh,
idea of half of that.
heartbreaking.
Well, it is, and tragic. But we don't have that kind of phenomenon at all in the UK.
Wow.
Um, so that evangelical in Britain has tended to mean low church, emphasis on conversion and personal spirituality, emphasis on two main doctrines, the inspiration of Scripture and the atoning death of Jesus, interpreted in traditional Protestant ways. And when people say, "Are you an evangelical?" I say, "Well, when I was growing up, evangelical meant believing in the Bible and believing in the death of Jesus. I still kind of believe those two things. They're pretty central to me. So I fail to see why I should give up the word evangelical, thank you. But I know that it has to be hashed out and explained." But now, these days, very interestingly, evangelicals in Britain got more and more strong through the 60s, 70s, and particularly 80s, so that now a lot of churches which weren't evangelical or low church have become so because that's more people are in that stream and
Hmm.
far less in what used to be the liberal mainstream. That has kind of died back. That stuff doesn't reproduce too well. So we have quite a strong Anglo-Catholic strand, which is orthodox in theology, high church in liturgy, but often links arms with evangelicals. Certainly happens in Oxford now, because basically we all believe in that stuff about God and Jesus and the Bible and
Hmm.
things, and yet we may differ in how we express it. And I'm kind of a crossbencher on that because, in terms of liturgical style, having been a bishop in the Church of England, I'm very used to all the liturgical styles there are, and I can be comfortable with any of them. Some a little bit more than others, perhaps, but basically I'm home and dry. So that's who I've become. And as I look back, I've had a long life. I'm 77 now, which is extraordinary. But life has just ticked by. You think, where did those years go? And very strange. So
I feel that way, and I'm 46. Yeah.
you're halfway between my two sons. I have two sons, two daughters, and older son is 52, younger son's 43. So you're in between.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow. Well, okay, so I imagine that when you get into ministry, you enter into that and you're sort of shaped by your theology, right? Like
Yeah.
when you start as a priest, and then as you start that work, do you um, does your theology start to become shaped by your work? Like, do you change what you believe a little bit? Not the macro of it, but the micro of it as you start working?
I think there are bound to be changes. There certainly were for me, um, because I realized when I was studying theology that I wanted to go on and do a doctorate, and if possible, then to go and be a teacher because I was
Hmm.
so enjoying the world of Pauline scholarship, which I had dived into.
Yeah.
So then I was given a junior job here in Oxford, a 3-year fellowship. So I was ordained to a fellowship in one of the Oxford colleges, which is slightly unusual in terms of how things are normally done, but the bishop was happy to do it. So I worked with the guy who was then the chaplain at that college, who was a very devout, um, quite quiet, introverted, but very, very wise
Hmm.
priest, Christian teacher, etc. And I learnt so much from him just by watching him and reflecting on, and we were from quite different traditions, but we worked very happily together, and I had enormous respect for him. But yes, as you're then being a priest, a teacher, a pastor, leading in worship and leading Bible studies, and then having individuals come to you and say, I have this problem, you learn on the job. And a lot of the stuff that you might have learned at seminary might come back to help, but quite often might not be there. So you then have to go off to friends and say, hey, what do I do about this? Or see if there's a book on this particular problem. And so, as I say, I learnt on the job, and no doubt made many mistakes as I as I went along.
Wow. How do you feel like you yourself changed over the years, in your practice?
Well, in my practice, I think having worked with this colleague when I was first ordained, who was in a very gentle way, he was a high churchman. He would cross himself, he would genuflect, he would pray in a certain way. Whereas my evangelical tradition, we wouldn't do much of that stuff. But because I respected him, I could see that there was a sense of the presence and love of God about him. Then
Mm,
I realized that if I had prejudices against people doing some of the things he was doing, then so much the worst for me, because it
mm,
actually didn't seem to matter nearly as much as some people thought it did. And so gradually, and I think, we all mature in different ways and we all express ourselves in different ways. And then I was very amused when, in the charismatic movement, when that finally sort of took hold in Britain in the 80s and 90s, some people started to be hugely legalistic about if you were going to be singing certain songs, you had to raise your arms in the air. And if you weren't
sure.
doing that, you weren't the real thing. I remember saying, so they cross themselves as an aspect of devotion, and you think that's legalistic. And you insist on raising your arms, and you think that's led by the Spirit. It might be the other way around, might it not? And so that I live with those kind of low grade, amusing tensions in my spirituality and practice. Um, but I mean, for me. Um, Obviously, my main teacher theologically was St. Paul, because I did my doctorate
Mm,
on Paul, and
yeah.
the first stuff that I wrote was about Paul. And trying to figure out, which was really what my dissertation was all about, how Romans and Galatians work together. What is Paul saying about the law that is so negative in Galatians and so positive in Romans? Um, how does
Mm,
justification work in those different contexts? And then in the middle of all of that, um, along came Ed Sanders and other people, and I was exactly where I was getting to, which was, how come every time Paul talks about justification, he's also talking about the inclusion of Gentiles within the church?
mm,
And some people have resisted that enormously. Um, I suspect because some people have used justification by faith to prop up some kind of ethnocentric Christian nationalism or whatever. So the idea that Paul was interested in having people of all sorts come into the church, and that this was not incidental, this was actually central,
mm.
that's been scary for some people, and you will understand what I'm talking about there. So for me, the new perspective on Paul, so-called, didn't in any way undermine all the things I basically believed. It fleshed them out, and it
Yeah.
made exegesis all the more exciting, because I could see how this was playing out in ways that hadn't been explored. And so for me, a lifetime of Pauline scholarship had opened up. And that has been enormously enriching in all sorts of ways. And then simultaneously, I started to get interested in historical Jesus questions, and was in the middle of just getting going on that when the so-called Jesus seminar started up in
Mm,
America. And so that has provided lots of food for thought, discussion, debate, books, etc., etc. So the track of Pauline theology and the track of historical Jesus theology, scholarship and history, have been absolutely central to me. And in the course of that, I've had to change a huge amount. I'll give you one example.
yeah.
They asked me quite early on if I would write the Tyndale commentary on Colossians. There was an older edition and they wanted a new edition. Now, Colossians is just a short letter, so I thought, maybe I can do that. I was just finishing my doctorate. Maybe I could write a little commentary on Colossians.
This
So I
was what
set off.
when?
This would be
W- w-
1980, 81, something like
Okay,
that.
okay.
When I was about to go to Montreal as a young professor at McGill University, um, and I tried to write a first draft of Colossians, and I got stuck on the poem in chapter 1. From verse 15 onwards, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, because it was all about Christ and the powers. And I had no grid of interpretation for that. It wasn't part of my thinking, experience, whatever. I really didn't know what Paul was talking about. So I put the project aside for a while.
Hmm.
And then, for quite other reasons, over the next 18 months, 2 years, I went through a very difficult time. I think it was delayed culture shock from moving with my family from the UK to Canada. Um, and
Oh,
we didn't have much money, and we had 4 small children, and blah, 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 all sorts of things. And it was a very traumatic time.
oh.
But through the help of some wise counselors and friends, I actually came to terms with things in myself and with things that I had been needing to sort out, which I'd never really realized before, and which have just helped me enormously ever since. At the cusp of that, I thought I better go back to Colossians and get cracking on this again. And I went back to Colossians 1, and I was nervous. What was I going to find when I got to verse 15?
Yeah.
And when I got to verse 15, I read it. It all made sense. And I thought, oh, that's curious. Didn't make sense last time. And I realized things had shifted within me to the point where I could read this text and I knew what it was about.
Hmm.
And that's always been a sign for me that maybe Christian maturity has as one of its markers when texts that you couldn't figure out before suddenly make sense, and you realize there's probably a lot more out there still waiting for us to grow up into them. So that was a real transition for me, and in a sense I've never looked back from that. and
Hmm.
and, and I think theologically that was the moment when I really rejected Platonic dualism, which I think up till then, even my evangelicalism had been very Platonic. We're going to heaven, so this world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. Um, and really, that won't do. That's
Hmm.
Plato. It's not the Bible. But coming to terms with that personally, at gut level, as well as intellectually, it's gone on and on and on. And my newest book, which you maybe want to talk about, I don't know, is do you know? Have you seen this?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it just out. I think it's out in 10 days' time, something like that. No, 5 days'
Yeah, it'll
time.
be out by the time
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
this
Good.
comes out. Yeah.
Um, this is perhaps the most trenchant response to Christian Platonism that I have yet written, and
Hmm.
but that goes with Surprised by Hope and so on, which you're obviously familiar with.
Yeah.
So that was a major transition for me, and all sorts of things changed, but the changes happen slowly. I found as a theologian, you can't rush things. You're working on a problem, and you're aware of difficult texts and difficult issues and contemporary writers you don't quite understand. And then gradually, you come round a corner, see things from a different light. And you think, I wish I could have seen this 4 or 5 years ago. And the answer is, no, it took you that long to get round to this. I have a little project which I've been, a silly little project really, which is called 50 Things I Wish I'd Known 50 Years Ago.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
and there's, I don't know whether that's going to turn into a book or not, but I've been having fun just sort of
Please
sketching.
let it.
Okay, I've been having fun sketching it out, um, because please God, people growing up now may learn from me and many others, and then be starting from a new place and move forward into the 50 things God wants them to know over the next 50 years, and
Hmm.
and that's maybe what we should all be praying for and looking for.
Yes. Well, okay, so I have so many questions now after this. As a writer, are you writing because you have something that you want to teach? Are you writing because you have something you want to explore? Are you writing because is there an artistic desire in you? What is the drive for you?
That's a good question.
You've written like 100 books.
Nearly, not quite. Um, 85, I think, at the moment.
That's
But uh, about 20 years ago, we were with some friends one day and discussing this, that, the other. And this particular friend said to me, he said, Tom, are you basically a theologian who wants to write to teach people the theology, or are you basically a writer whose subject matter happens to be theology? And I'd never really thought of it like that before.
Great
But I
question.
said, do you know, actually, when I think about it, I think I'm a writer who happens to be in love with the Bible and theology. And so for me, writing has always been easy.
Hmm.
You have to work at it. You have to shape and prune and rewrite and edit. But uh, I can produce a flow of words on. I mean, I was lucky in that I came of age academically just when computers were coming on stream. And I
Mm.
learned to touch type early on, and I just became very fluent in getting things done on the machine, which is so much physically quicker and easier than writing longhand, let alone an old-fashioned typewriter, which is what I
Yeah.
did my dissertation on in the late 1970s. Heaven help us.
Oh
Um,
my.
but so no, I love writing. I love shaping sentences and paragraphs and so on. And no doubt I'm sometimes quite self-indulgent about that. But then I love the sense that one is communicating at several different levels. And so that you're producing an argument. Of course, if in the sort of books
Mhm.
that I write, you're arguing this point and that point and the other point, but you try to make it sing. You try to make it um, a coherent whole, so that a reader can actually have a sense of satisfaction, of readerly satisfaction. One of the nicest things that I've had said to me about that some years ago, when a friend of mine who was teaching a student, and she'd been reading my book, Jesus and the Victory of God, and she had said to my friend, who was then the teacher, said, I started to enjoy it when I realized it was a symphony. And I thought, yes, that's
Oh,
exactly
come
right.
on.
That you've got these great blocks of material, and like a symphony, you're moving from one to the other, but there is continuity and the themes reappear and developed and
Hmm.
so on. And if I, if I hadn't been a theologian, I would love to have been either a composer or a conductor, because classical music is very much my world. Um,
Really?
but instead of that, I've simply gone on writing books.
Wow. Okay, well, you use the word argument, and that
Yeah.
makes me really curious because I uh I found somewhere a stream of podcasts of you doing sort of public debates, you and Peter Thiel.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, the world's supervillain. You guys discussing, and I remember I had been at some event a few years ago where somebody had read a passage of a new translation of the Bible, and it was David Bentley Hart's, and I'd never heard of him. And I was like, that was beautiful. And I went and I bought his translation. And a few weeks later, somebody had read a translation of something else, and it was your
Oh
New
right,
Testament. And so I didn't know anything about him. And for
right.
months, I had both of those two
Interesting, interesting.
versions in my bag, and I would read them back to back. Be like, oh, these two new versions, how fascinating.
Well,
And I would
well,
read
well,
the
well.
same passage. And then one day I Googled him, and I learned that you guys have an interesting history.
Well, not really. I've never met him, and friends who know him have said to me that he's not been the easiest person to get to know, to befriend. Um,
It seems like that, yeah.
having never met him, I couldn't comment with any authority on that. But I mean, the magazine, what's it called? Not Christianity Today, Christian
Was it
Century.
World?
Christian
Oh,
Century asked me if I would review his New Testament translation, and so I thought, well, I've done one myself. I'd be intrigued to see what this great theologian. I'd read some of his stuff. I knew of his systematic and philosophical work. So let's see what he does. And I couldn't get on with it. I mean, all sorts of things which were very strange about it. And he was using the translation to flog his horse, particularly in terms of a rejection of Augustinian theology, and particularly to push his vision for universalism. Now,
yes, yes.
okay, if that's what you want to argue, argue it, but don't change the text in order to do so. And
Yes.
there were several really strange things in the text, and I actually wrote quite a critical review, and then I thought it's too sharp, so I toned it down quite a bit. And then I talked to the editor at Christian Century and said, can we make sure this isn't too unfriendly, as it were? but it was already far too unfriendly for the man himself, and I gathered there
Yes.
was a very hostile reaction. So I just thought, well, okay. Um, but I mean, there were several. I actually wrote to the publishers because there were several
Yeah.
places where the translation was not just wrong but embarrassingly wrong, and I said you might want to get him to put these right. But so
Wow.
I do not know him. I suspect he doesn't want to know me, which is a shame. I mean, um, insofar I believe in getting on with people. When I was in debate with all the Jesus Seminar guys, some of them, Dom Crossan and Marcus Borg and Walter Wink, became good friends and have remained close friends. Though sadly, Walter and Marcus are no longer with us. But
Hmm.
when I've run into Dom Crossan, we greet each other like old friends, even though we were sparring partners. But we kind of respected each other. Um, but some of them, Robert Funk himself, who started the Jesus Seminar, he wouldn't give me the time of day. And there were some
Hmm.
others who just regarded me as, and I think partly that was that some in the Jesus Seminar were reacting very strongly against the American fundamentalism of their youth, either Catholic fundamentalism or
Hmm.
Protestant fundamentalism. And because I had the reputation of being a British evangelical, they didn't really know what that was, but they knew they didn't like it. So there was a kind of a head to head there. But yeah, I did my best going to seminars and giving reviews at conferences and that sort of thing to engage.
Yeah.
Okay, we're all reading the same text. Let's have a look at it. See how the history works. Let's and make the argument. And this is the thing about here is, and you may know that 25 years ago, Marcus Borg and I did a little book together called "The Meaning of Jesus' Two Visions."
No, I
Because
don't know about
oh
this.
yeah, yeah. Because we had both been involved in the Jesus Seminar project and spin-offs from that. But Marcus and I had become really good friends. We had the same Doktorvater here in Oxford, though not at the same time. We didn't know each other then, but we kind of gravitated together in the
Hmm.
1980s when we first met. And through the 90s. And we used to hang out together, and he and his wife would stay with us in England, and we've stayed with them in Oregon, and so on.
Wow.
Um, and Marcus then one day said to me, he said, Tom, um, wherever I go, churches want to have the discussion that you and I have, but they don't know how. Because
Wow.
all they can do is to lob hand grenades over a wall at each other. You just say that
Hmm.
because you're an unbelieving liberal. You just say that because you're a crypto fundamentalist, whatever. And he said, what we need to do is we need to write a book where we engage in real dialogue with one another, partly because that'll be fun anyway, but partly to model how to do that for the church. And so we did.
Yes.
And we we started. Marcus came over to the UK. He had a travel fund, which I was very envious of. He came over to the UK, spent a few weeks here, and was staying in Oxford. Well, we were living in Lichfield. And I came down to spend a couple of days in Oxford with him, and we went and sat in the back of the Eagle and Child pub, which is where C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien and people used to sit. And we consciously, and laughing at ourselves for it, said we'll start our project here too. So that's what we
That's
did.
amazing. Well, I love that because I, I live in America, this culture where there is lots of public debate and it is mean,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
people
yeah,
are calling each other names.
yeah.
And I will see you sometimes enter willfully into a discussion where you're going to disagree with someone, and you're so civil and kind, and both sides will be kind. And I'm like, how do you, why do you do this? But to yourself, but how do you prepare for it? But also it reminds me of like G.K. Chesterton. That's how orthodoxy came about. There is this great tradition of public discussion, and that's
Sure.
how you sharpen ideas.
Sure. Well, that's exactly right. And I mean, my intellectual formation was partly when I was doing the classics degree here at Oxford, which is
Hmm.
philosophy and ancient history. And the philosophy you basically do from Plato and Aristotle right forward to the 20th century, which in Oxford meant the analytic philosophical movement, skipping over a few things en route, of course, like we didn't touch the medievals. But the whole point about philosophy being that you're engaging with one another, looking at the world and human beings and reading the great texts and saying, I think this is how they all work out. And then somebody else comes along and says, no, it's like this. One of the very first papers I wrote for my philosophy tutor was on Aristotle's critique of Plato's theory of the forms. And we were kind of taking sides. Do you think Plato had the better of this argument? And my tutorial partner and I completely disagreed. I was a Christian, he was a Marxist. So I was rooting for Plato, he was rooting for Aristotle. Now, when I look back, I think, oh, actually, he was probably right. And that's fine, because you put the stuff on the table and you see how the concepts work and you line them up. And we're all involved in the same massive cosmic intellectual jigsaw. And we're all like people doing a jigsaw around an enormous table. Here's a little bit here. Now, doesn't that go with this? And somebody else says, no, that goes over there. Oh, well, maybe. But if that was so, maybe we got that bit wrong, and so on. And so there's a kind of sense of a shared project, which is always there. And you don't normally refer to it because you're normally just working on your little bit here. But you're kind of aware there are enormous issues culturally, philosophically, psychologically, and you're kind of in it together. And you're also aware, and especially in the postmodern period, that Heisenberg's uncertainty principle comes home to roost. That when you look at something, the fact that you're looking at it changes it. In other words, the observer influences that which is observed. And how that plays out and how self-aware we are as we do that. And that's when things can get a bit tetchy sometimes. C.S. Lewis nailed this one. You only say that because you're a ... And what's the thing with how do you respond to somebody whose argument hinges on the fact that 2 + 2 = 4? And Lewis says the answer is you only say that because you're a mathematician. And Lewis was awfully good at nailing that. But so I grew up in that atmosphere, and the mantra really was, I will disagree like anything with you, but I will defend to the death your right to say what you say and to see the stuff like you see it. We will debate it. I'd like to change your mind, but you've got the right to say it because that's what you're seeing. And so that's very much the world in which I grew up. And sadly, not everyone takes it that way.
No, it's beautifully refreshing. It's a gift to see. Well, on a lighter topic, right before we got on or clicked record, you mentioned that you have 2.5 guitars, and I have heard through the grapevine that you do play guitar, that you mentioned that you love music, and that you in another life could be a symphony conductor and things. What is your relationship with music? What is your relationship with the guitars that you have?
Yeah, the music thing goes way, way back. I grew up in a house where there was what we had in those days, a record player with funny things that went round and round in circles.
They're coming back.
My father had a basic collection of classical music records, and I would sit and listen to them. And my early memories of Handel's Messiah or of Haydn's symphonies or of Beethoven 5 or whatever go back early on in my boyhood. And then I was singing in a parish church choir, which was quite a good choir, so we could put on Handel's Messiah every other year or whatever. And so learning to read music was just like learning to read books. I don't think I ever was taught how to do it. If you're singing in a choir and you look at the page, it just kind of happens. And then I started having piano lessons. I wasn't very good because I didn't practice properly, but then I realized I really needed to work at it because I wanted to be able to do the stuff, whether it was classics or jazz or whatever. It's funny, my sister, who's a year older than me, she was having proper piano lessons, and she was very strict. Here's what it says on the page. This is what I will play. And I would sit down at the piano and vamp stuff and make it up.
Same here.
Yeah. It was two totally different personalities. But then I have a cousin who's 5 years older than me who played guitar. And when I was, 10 or 11, watching this tall, handsome young man, my cousin, playing the guitar, I need to do this. But we couldn't afford one. We didn't have much money. And my father, who was, he ran a family business, which was a timber business, but he was very, very good with his hands, with timber, with woodwork, with all the stuff that goes with that. And so he found and procured for me a kit for actually making a guitar. And he basically, with my little bit of help, we made a guitar,
No
which
way.
is not a very good guitar, but it was a playable guitar. And I've still got that. That it doesn't often come out, but it's still sitting there
Is
as a
that the
memento.
half?
Hmm?
Is that the
Yeah,
half of a
well,
guitar?
yeah. Then there's another guitar. I'm not even sure where it is right now, with Maggie and me living in two different places.
Sure.
But that was one that I had kind of in between times, which was okay to play in public, but not anything special. Then my kids gave me a Gibson for my 60th birthday, and that's been a delight. I don't play it enough, but on the occasions when it needs to come out, it's a joy. And You probably know that Francis Collins, the geneticist, the scientist, he and I have played and sung together, and we've written songs together. Did
You
you know that?
have? No,
Yeah.
I did not know this. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Google Tom Wright and Francis Collins Genesis, because we have a song on Genesis which is to the tune of Paul McCartney's "Yesterday." Um,
That's
it's actually
amazing.
a funny story, which should tell you something about me and music and so on. Um, Maggie and I were in Rome, 10 years ago, at a conference at this time of the year, February, and it was cold, it was snowing. And I had to go to a conference paper, but she was out shopping at the Spanish Steps, but it was snowing, so she got a taxi back. And the cab driver, all the way back, was singing to her, singing old Beatles songs to her. And she came into the hotel room and she said, "I've just been serenaded by this cab driver yesterday." Um, I then had to leave and go over to the conference. And the paper that afternoon was in Italian. Now, my Italian's not good. And there was simultaneous translation, but that was not good either. And my mind drifted to the fact that I was about to go to a Biologos meeting in New York with Francis Collins. Um, and I knew he was a great guitarist. Um, and then it came into my head. Biologos is all about, faith and science, etc. And so the beginnings of the song came to me, and I scribbled it down. Genesis, earth and heaven in a cosmic bliss. Evolution must have been like this. Oh, I believe in Genesis. And I thought, dare I send this to Francis? Will he be offended? And I emailed it to Francis, and Francis emailed straight back. DNA shaping creatures from the dust and clay, double helix in the Milky Way. Oh, Genesis means DNA. So it went from there. We have played and sung that in numerous locations. And so
Wow.
Google it, you'll
Oh yeah,
see.
we will put that in the show notes. We will make sure the people who are watching this can find that. That's
And
incredible.
actually, the Biologos people, they got Francis and me when the pandemic was going on and we weren't able to travel. We actually recorded that song, and the guy who organized it made a tape of a kind of a metronome for the song. And I had to have my headphones on, and I was standing in this study here in Oxford playing, making sure I was in time with the metronome. Francis, on a different day, did the same thing in his room in DC, and then they put it together. It really worked. So we're either side of the Atlantic singing this song and doing it together. Anyway, you'll see. You'll see.
That
So
is
that I
wonderful.
mean, but that so through my genes, I played guitar a lot. I mean, a
Mm.
lot. I played in folk clubs and all sorts of things.
And you said that's how you met your wife too,
Yeah,
right?
there was a Christian folk concert being organised in Oxford in the late summer of '69, and there were a whole bunch of us that were singing and playing guitars and goodness knows what. And Maggie was actually singing with somebody else, and I invited her to come and sing one particular song with me. And that was, though she was actually with somebody else at the time, people who saw us singing together at that concert told us later that they had said, yeah, watch that one. And they were right. And 55 years later, here we still are.
That's incredible. Okay, so when you were playing songs back in the '60s, who were your artists? Were the Beatles
Oh,
songs, Dylan
I
songs?
mean,
Who were you into?
Beatles certainly, but it wasn't quite my style. But certainly Dylan, Joan Baez, Peter, Paul and Mary. I love Peter, Paul and Mary. Um, And that whole genre, Tom Paxton, Phil Oakes, who died far too young,
Mhm.
and I would get hold of Gordon Lightfoot when I was in Canada.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
did a
yeah.
gap year in Canada between school and university, and I got to know the music of Gordon Lightfoot, and actually went to a concert of his in Toronto. And in those days, the way I would do it would be I would get hold of a record and I would play it again and again and again and write down the words. And while I was doing that, figure out the chords. And then once I'd got that, make my own variation on it. But so I did a lot of Dylan, I did a lot of Peter, Paul and Mary, and a lot of that whole 60s stuff. Um, to be honest, once I started theology and then we got married and then we had children, there just wasn't that much time. And so there's a kind of a falling off in the early and middle 70s. And I look back at that time and I think everything up to then, yeah, I know all that stuff. After that, it's a closed book. But that's when my early love of classical music has just sustained me forever.
It's beautiful.
And whether it's Mozart or Sibelius is a great favourite of mine, or the great church music tradition, which I've been part of, and now bits of my family have been part of. Some wonderful, wonderful music, and Henry Purcell, or we had an anthem by Benjamin Britten night before last, if I remember rightly,
Hmm.
and so on and so forth. So and that whole world has sustained me. And where we live in Oxford is literally 5 minutes walk from the Sheldonian Theatre, where you can hear symphonies and quartets and so on. And even closer is the Holywell Music Room, which is the little 18th century music room where people like Handel and Haydn played when they came to Oxford.
You're
And
kidding.
it's just on this street, just a short walk up here. I pass it
That's
each time I go to
incredible.
the newsagent.
Wow. Well, let's end with this. You've got a new book that's coming out,
Oh yeah,
God's
yeah.
Homecoming. Would you tell us about this book? Where this book come from?
Okay. Those who know Surprised by Hope will not be surprised, but um, the opening sentence, a couple of sentences of the main text of the book, says it all, really. Most people today imagine that the point of Christianity is to go to heaven when you die. That's what most believers believe. It's what most unbelievers unbelieve. And it's
Hmm.
certainly what journalists, broadcasters, and popular commentators think Christianity is supposed to be all about. They are all wrong. The point of Christianity is not that we should go to heaven. The point of Christianity is that heaven should come to us, to earth, in Jesus' words. And so the story that the early Christians told was not about how can my soul get upstairs and see God. It was about the New Jerusalem coming down so that the dwelling of God is with humans, not the dwelling of humans is with God. And when you then read the whole narrative from Genesis to Revelation under that rubric, with the great break that comes with Jesus, and it is a great break, all sorts of things change with that, but the same narrative is present throughout. Um, I was just reading part of Psalm 119 in my morning prayers this morning. And the earth, O Lord, is full of your chesed, your loving kindness. The idea that the earth is a shabby thing that the Platonic world would say we need to get out of this place, that's totally wrong. The earth is God's earth, and the great scriptural promises are that the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And then here's the trick. In Ephesians, you may have seen a book on Ephesians, which I just did last year. Um, uh, Ephesians 3 is all about how that promise of God filling the whole creation with his glory and splendor and knowledge is anticipated when the Holy Spirit comes to live within individuals in the church, so that the church is called to be the small working model of new creation. And that then gives you a high road into missiology in all its bits and pieces, and into liturgy, and into sacramental theology, and into answering the question, what do we say about people who've died? What is the hope?
Hmm.
And what happens between bodily death and bodily resurrection? So all of that I'm addressing in this book. And it's kind of a sigh of relief. I've been trying to write that book, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years.
Hmm.
But COVID intervened, and then I got long COVID, then I got rheumatoid arthritis, and everything slowed down. So it's a great relief actually to hold it in my hands and say, yes, it's arrived, it's here.
Oh, I can't wait to read it. It sounds like
Good,
it speaks to a lot of things I am anxious to learn about. So,
good. Bless you.
Surprised by Hope was a gift to me in that filled in a lot of holes of things I had taken apart and not put back together,
Exactly,
and that was a
exactly.
real gift to me.
I,
So,
I get
thank
more
you.
letters, emails, phone calls, strangers stopping me in the street about Surprised by Hope than everything else I've ever done.
Hmm.
I mean, quite literally, a few months ago, I was waiting for a guest here in Oxford, and our house opens right onto the street here. And I was standing on the front doorstep, watching up the street to see if our friends were coming. And three people walked by who I didn't know at all. And one of them suddenly swung around and said, "You're N.T. Wright." I said, "Yes." And she said, "Surprised by Hope." And I said, "Yes." It was like, "What are you doing here?" And, "Well, I actually live here." uh, but so it's Surprised by Hope is the one that's certainly got that kind of airtime.
Well, it's a question that a lot of people have that
Yeah, yeah,
people
yeah.
haven't answered well. So,
Yeah,
thank you.
well,
Well,
well, and especially in America, where so many people are either given a Catholic view of heaven and hell, or a Protestant view of heaven and hell and a rapture.
yeah, with action movies is
Yeah,
our
quite
theology.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so people who've been brought up in either of those systems, when they read this, and it's not because I've been clever, it's because I'm simply telling them what's in the Bible, which they didn't put it together like that. And so it goes on. And so it goes on. Anyway,
Well, thank you so much for your time. This was
you're
an
very welcome.
incredible gift and honor. Really great to meet you and talk with you. This was
Well,
a treat.
one day, who knows, we should play guitars together, but
That would be a great treat. Yes.
I
Yeah.
need to
Thank
practice.
you.
Okay, very good to see you.
Well, that was just delightful. How fun. Like he mentioned, his new book is called God's Homecoming. If you've never read any of N.T. Wright's books, some other great places to start are Surprised by Hope and Simply Jesus. Those are two that I've read that are just fantastic. He also has a podcast that is so wonderful. It's called Ask N.T. Wright Anything, which could sound presumptuous. If you're like, ask him anything, he knows everything. But I think it came out of like a magazine article or something where people would just ask him questions and he would just sort of kind of pontificate. And that's what he does on this podcast. People just ask him all kinds of questions, deep theological questions, sort of politics and church questions, questions about music. It's really fascinating. He's so charming and winsome and knows more about the Bible than just about anybody else alive. And it's a great listen. There's like hundreds of episodes. I think it's like a radio show, so it's in little chunks and well worth your time. Great listen. What a huge honor to get to talk to him, which was made possible by my production team, Four Eyes Media, that I work with, that pulled that off. When we started working together about a year ago, when we started putting the show back out, I gave them a big list of people that I would love to talk to, and N.T. Wright was on the top of the list, and I was like, there's no way that's going to happen. And then I got this email said, guess who said yes? I was like, holy cow. So thank you, Laura and Abigail and Alexandra, for making that happen. I do have to say this. Here's my little plug. If you enjoy this podcast or my Substack and you would like to support the work that we do, you could do that by supporting the Substack. andrewosenga.substack.com. You can be a subscriber there. You can be a paid subscriber there. A couple bucks a month goes to help the work that we do. Supports that team, supports my work here. Even just subscribing also supports a lot. Come on over and join the conversation there. Right now, working on a series about why we sing the songs we do on Sunday mornings, which has been really fun. Getting some lively discussion over there, which I probably need to go put a stop to if I'm being responsible. I should probably go do that. But it's been a lot of fun, and we're going somewhere that I'm excited about in that conversation. So come hang out on the Substack, and we'll be back in a couple weeks with another really, really fantastic episode. I'm not going to tell you who, and buckle up. I will tell you that. It's going to be pretty fun. All right. Oh, yeah, I got, a book and music, and you can buy all those things. So thank you. All right, thanks for hanging out. You're awesome. Now go do something awesome.